Those cannon blasts mean one thing. It is time for our fourth mock draft show here at Pewter Report. Bucs attack the secondary. I am your host for this special edition of the Pewter Report podcast, sponsored by Walk-Ons Sports Bistro with locations in Midtown Tampa, Wesley Chapel, and Lakeland. And yours truly, Scott Reynolds, is here with Josh Capo from Pewter Report. We're going to go over our fourth Pewter Report 7-round Bucs mock draft tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We're excited about the show tonight. Fresh on the heels of having Yaya Diaby on our 4 o'clock podcast. And Yaya was a big-time draft hit for the Buccaneers just a couple of years ago in the 3rd round. And we'll see if there are some other draft hits out there as well. There's Josh Capo. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well, Scott. I'm doing well. However, thinking about this mock draft, and you and I were just talking about this off air, I don't love it. I don't love how the board fell, and I don't. While I could see all of these players being Bucs picks, that's why we put them in here. This would not be a draft that I walked away from going, "Oh yeah, I love this." So, and I think you feel the same way.
Yes, and we kind of came to those conclusions independently, and we both had that aha moment together. And it's let's start with the premise here. The premise was we wanted to change it up because we've had a couple of edge rushers, right? We did our first mock draft. We had Mike Green from Marshall. Our second mock draft, we actually did a trade for Trey Hendrickson, right? And that's not going to happen. I think he's stuck in Cincinnati. poor Trey Hendrickson. And then our third mock draft, we did Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. And so we wanted to kind of mix this one up a little bit. And we know who we're going to pick in our 5th mock draft, which will come out April 21st. That's Monday. We'll have a special Monday night show as well after our regular podcast on Monday. And we'll kind of go into that as well. But we wanted to do something different here, almost like in 2019, when we had Devin White in 4 out of our 5 mock drafts, because I knew the Bucs were going to draft him back in January. We were the first media outlet to have Devin White going to the Buccaneers in January of 2019. We had Devin White, and we switched it to Josh Allen, the pass rusher from Kentucky. Probably would have been a better pick, perhaps, in hindsight, although Devin helped this franchise win a Super Bowl. Then we went back to Devin and Devin. So this is kind of one of those mock drafts where we kind of forced the pick a little bit because Malachi Starks was a guy that they met with formally. They might even bring him in for a top 30 visit or an official 30 visit, Josh. And he is also a position of need because he can play nickel. He can play strong safety as well, kind of like another guy that he played with at Georgia and is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer.
Yeah, that Tyke Smith guy who the Bucs used almost exclusively at nickel last year, and it's kind of where he played, throughout his time in Georgia. And then obviously, Jason Light has spoken publicly on this. Todd Bowles has spoken publicly on this. The team thinks that they may want to try him at that strong safety position now that they, no longer have Jordan Whitehead after declining his option. And so Malachi Starks would give the team a lot of versatility because we know Tyke can play the slot, and we know that the Bucs want to move or nickel, and the Bucs want to move him to safety. We know Antoine Winfield Jr. can play for safety. We know he can play nickel from his time at nickel in 2022. And then, Winfield, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world, he has a lot of great traits to play strong safety. So the thinking here is if the Bucs selected Starks, the amount of versatility that they would have with those 3 players on the field would be, for a creative mind like Todd Bowles, would be like, being a kid in a candy store with American Express Black Card, right? The amount of rotations you could move depending on matchups. If you like Winfield against a specific slot receiver, you could do that and then run Tyke and Malachi up top. They could do all sorts of things and get really, really deceptive with the back end coverage. And all 3 are able to do so much. And it's that versatility that I think is probably Starks' biggest pro when you list
Right.
like what are the pros, what are the strengths and weaknesses. The biggest strength for him is conceptually you can play him in any role that you can think of for a safety, much like Tyke, much like Antoine.
Right. And the other thing too is he is a bit of a ball hawk, right? I mean, you look at the interceptions he's had in the last 3 seasons at Georgia, 2 interceptions in 2022, 7 pass breakups, 3 interceptions in 2023, and then an interception last year, along with 3 pass breakups. So he has been known to make some plays, and that's something that Todd Bowles has said that he desperately wants in the secondary. And so, reuniting these guys too, and they have some chemistry already on the field together. They won a national championship at Georgia. So it kind of makes sense too, because you want your first round pick to see the field, right? To get the best value, that player needs to see the field. And doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time starter, but when you look at really the only vacancy right now, if you look at Hassan Reddick getting assigned to play opposite Yaya Diaby, obviously every offensive starter is back on that side of the ball. You've got Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea. You have Servassier Dennis penciled in next to Levante David. So really the only spots that are quote unquote open, right, for someone to come in, a rookie to come in, a first round draft pick to come in and play right away would be nickel corner, right, or strong safety, one or the other, wherever Tyke plays. Cornerback, if that person can come in and beat out Jamel Dean, or inside linebacker, if that person could come out and beat Servassier Dennis. And this team really does like Servassier Dennis. Like, that is legit. He did enough to whet their appetite. They think he's going to be a good player. Now, if they draft someone like, say, Jihad Campbell, right, from Alabama at number 19, or in the first round trading up or down, Jihad Campbell can come in, compete with Servassier Dennis, and I think Servassier Dennis is actually probably a better fit at Mo backer, which is the money backer spot, the weak side linebacker spot, because of his coverage ability. So it might be a thing where someone like Jihad Campbell comes in and is going to take the entire offseason to recover from the shoulder surgery. He had torn labrum shoulder surgery, probably misses training camp, probably misses the preseason. I don't know if that's a great value, right, for a team with the Super Bowl window open now to have a player like that come in and maybe have to redshirt his freshman season. But you essentially are drafting another starting linebacker with Servassier Dennis for 2026, and you're increasing the talent and the depth of the linebacker position. So really only a couple spots: nickel corner / safety, cornerback, and an inside linebacker where you could have a starter. Now, you can rotate in an edge rusher.
Yep.
You can rotate in a defensive tackle, and they do that quite a bit in Tampa.
Yeah, and they've shown a propensity to invest in those types of picks in the past. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka was a first-round draft pick when the Bucs had Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul. So he was drafted to be a rotational in first season, and then the following season, JPP, the team moved on from, and then he moved into that starting role. So with Hassan Reddick only being under contract for 1 year at the moment, it could still make sense for that. And Logan Hall, the year after that, they kind of drafted him, and he was rotational that first season. And even Kalijah Kancey was kind of used rotationally because they use those heavy rotations. So I think pass rusher or defensive lineman is a little bit of a different animal because of the way Todd Bowles and really the NFL in general just goes to this kind of rotational and wave. But to your other point, I mean, there's a clear path. If the Bucs do select Malachi Starks, there's a clear path to making sure that they can get a lot out of that investment from day one, whether that's him earning a starting role where he's playing all 3 downs, or Tyke getting the 3 down assignment, whether that's all, playing throughout all the downs as the high safety, or playing early downs as the high safety, and when Starks comes on the field, Tyke still rotates into the nickel, a lot like the Lions did with Brian Branch just this last year. There is a path for Starks to easily get a lot of snaps in year one.
A couple of positives about Malachi Starks, and the reason why we have him in this first round pick is we like him. We love him, but we like him. If that ends up being the pick, I can't say that's a bad pick because of the need, because of the pedigree. There, he is a playmaker. He's a good tackler. I think he's probably a little more twitchy and a better athlete than Tyke Smith. I don't know that he has maybe the instincts and the toughness, although I'm not saying he's not tough, but Tyke's got a little special something about him. He's a bit of a dog, and I'm not saying Malachi Starks isn't, but in terms of the dog meter, I think, Tyke might have a little bit more of that, whereas in terms of pure athlete, maybe Malachi Starks has a little bit of that. What are your thoughts on how Tyke and Malachi compare athletically?
Yeah, I think with Starks, like he's an above average athlete. He's not an elite athlete. And I think that would be a small departure from what the Bucs have typically done in the first round, where they've typically gotten. And I don't want this to be misconstrued that the Bucs just chase athletes in the first round. I think they look for good football players who have high-end athletic traits. But I'll just kind of go rattle through some of Starks's measurements. So he measured in at 6 foot and 7/8 inches, which is the 60th percentile for a safety. Yeah. His weight was 197, which is the 47th percentile. So basically just right in the middle there. Wingspan is 78 3/8 inches, and that's one of his two best measurables because that's the 87th percentile for safeties. Right. Arm length was 31 5/8 inch. That's 57th percentile. His 10-yard split was 1.51 seconds. That's 75th. And I think that for safeties, that's more important than the long speed. And his long speed was fine. 4.5 seconds is the 56th percentile. It's not that jump out of your seat, like, whoa, lights up the social medias, but it's plenty good for the position. And then his vertical jump was 36.5 inches, which was the 60th percentile. And his broad jump was 130 inches. That's 10 foot 10. That was the 90th percentile. That was his number one trait there. With Tyke, I think like the short area quickness.
Short area quickness.
Tyke, like with the long speed, his 40 was a 4.46. His 10-yard split was 10 or 1.58 seconds. So I think Starks, if the Bucs were to select him, I would want Tyke to go up top, and I think Starks at his best is when he's playing nickel. Yeah, and I think Tyke has a bit more versatility. So if this were to be the Bucs pick, I would hope for the transition that the Bucs have been hinting towards Tyke, and that Starks is really drafted to move into that nickel spot, because I do think that he has enough of that dog. I don't know if he's quite Tyke, but I think he can play the flats. He can blow up the perimeter screens. He can be a good run fitter, which is absolutely crucial these days for nickels. I think he hold up against power slots. So I think that that's kind of his best role would be in that nickel role.
I agree, and we're not done at nickel, folks. We're going to beef up some positions here. We have 3 defensive backs in our draft to get to. That's the first one right there, a guy that can play nickel or play safety position for them, and that's Malachi Starks, our first round pick at number 19. I mentioned Yaya Diaby earlier. Make sure that you check out our podcast. It's on Pewter Report TV, our YouTube channel, in the archive section. It was a great hour-long interview. We had an hour with Yaya Diaby. He had some great revelations, some really cool stuff from Yaya. This is a different version of Yaya. This is year 2025 loading right now for Yaya, and he's coming back with a vengeance. I loved everything I heard from him today on the podcast. Make sure you check that out. And we have got another Buccaneer guest coming next Wednesday. Special guest, Bucs quarterback Michael Pratt, who will be battling Kyle Trask for the backup job. And he came just after he was released from the Green Bay Packers. The Bucs wanted to draft him. Literally had his name on the card in the 7th round, and we're about to turn it in. The Packers actually picked Pratt one spot ahead of Tampa Bay. So they had to cross out that name and put in Devin Culp, the tight end from Washington. And they ended up getting both guys because they drafted Culp, and they ended up signing Pratt, who was on their practice squad last year. And let's take a look real quick at the official visits that we know so far. And you'll see a couple of these names in tonight's mock draft. Wide receiver Jalen Knoll from Iowa State, defensive tackle Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, Femi Oladipo, the outside linebacker, edge rusher from UCLA, Demetrius Knight, Jr., South Carolina, inside linebacker. Savon Revel Jr. from East Carolina, the cornerback, and a couple of other corners. They're probably nickel guys. Jacob Parrish from Kansas State and Nico Reed from Oregon. So those are the names so far, Josh, and only one offensive player so far. We've got 7 identified out of 30. So there's 23 that we don't know yet. I'm sure we'll learn more in the coming days. We typically find out about just over 20. So we do about 2/3 out of the full 30 we are able to identify. And a lot of these official 30 visit guys end up getting drafted by the Buccaneers. So who are you excited to see in town from this list? And are there any surprises for you?
I don't think any surprises. Maybe Shamar Turner. But the one I would say the 3 that I'm most excited on this list, obviously is Savon Revel. We've talked about him before. We've had him as a part of one of our mock drafts in the past. I think both you and I are huge fans of the skill set. He is very much a Zion McCollum-esque, and he's one of 2 corners in this draft that I think we are both really excited about in terms of the physical traits, joining Darian Porter. The thing is, I think the Bucs either take him in the first round or he probably won't be there when they go to select again in the second round, not unless they trade up a good bit from that 53rd overall pick. But I think that's one that I'm really excited about. Femi Oladejo, that's going back to Senior Bowl with you and me. Like he walked on the field. We were like, look at this guy. And then there was enough there that he popped for us. We both kind of identified him immediately. We were impressed, and immediately we were like, that's somebody the Bucs are really going to like. And that was before I think you and I figured out that he used to be an off-ball linebacker. And then we're like, that's a Todd Bowles wet dream right there. And then the last one, he's a corner that I got to late, but Nico Reed is, and I just heard, former Pewter reporter Trevor Sikkema, his NFL Stock Exchange program. They recently did an episode where they talked about like day 3 gems, and he talked about looking at day 3 guys, you want them to be high on the give a shit meter, and Nico Reed, I think, absolutely checks that box, very much like another player that we will have that we'll get to here in a couple of picks. But with Nico, he's a small guy. He's real small. I think he's 5'9", if I remember correctly. Like a $107, or no, actually, I think he's fairly rocked up. But he just plays with such intensity. He plays so much bigger than his frame. And I absolutely fell in love with him when I saw him going up against the Ohio State receivers and giving them everything, breaking up some passes. Like, I was really impressed with that. So those would be the 3 out of all of these players that I am most excited about.
Yeah, I'd say the guy I'm least excited about is Shamar Turner. I think he's probably a 2nd or 3rd round defensive tackle, and I just don't see the value there. And I thought his tape is okay. It's not the best. So we'll see. One little caveat to put a period on Malachi Starks before we get going with our other draft picks here for the Buccaneers. There was a couple reports, I guess, that he wants to be an NBA player, but he didn't play college basketball. Does that concern you at all? If his ultimate goal is to be in the NBA, and like, how are you going to get there? Is it just a pipe dream? I mean, Mike Evans wants to, in an alternate universe, in a different Marvel timeline, he wants to be an NBA hoopster, right? I mean, how do you take that news from Malachi Starks? Is he just not serious about football enough?
You there?
Yeah. What I was saying is with Malachi Starks saying that he wants to be in the NBA, right? That's his ultimate dream. How do you take that? Because Mike Evans wanted to, in his own mind, he's an NBA hoopster. He loves basketball. But does that concern you? Is that a red flag that he's not serious enough about football, or is it just because he didn't play college basketball?
Yeah, I'll go pro con. Pro.
Josh,
you're getting a very honest answer from the person. My Wi-Fi has been in and out, so I apologize. But
okay.
I'll just kind of reiterate the point that I was trying to make there. So I'll go pro con with it. So pro, you're getting a very transparent answer, right?
Yeah.
And these guys are absolutely prepped for these interviews and asked, or they know the answers that they're supposed to give that kind of check the boxes. And for him to give a very honest answer that maybe turns off teams, at least, on a character standpoint, he's an honest person. So I think that that's a really kind of a check in the good side. On the other side, how committed is this person who we're about to invest a first round draft pick, and how committed are they to being great at the profession that, whether they're choosing it or it's being chosen for them, obviously something that they're not the most passionate about. So it's kind of a give and take without being in the room to hear the thought process behind it. And obviously the other answers, I'm a little, I won't say it's a good or bad thing, but certainly something to parse through more.
I like when guys say, what's my ultimate goal? To be in the NFL Hall of Fame, Pro Football Hall of Fame, right? Because that shows me you want to be great, right? And speaking of great and wanting to be great, do it at Walk-Ons, Slam Dunk Madness, watch hoops, dunk apps all month long. 3 area Tampa Bay locations for Walk-Ons: Wesley Chapel, Midtown Tampa, and Lakeland. Make sure when you watch your final 4 college basketball games that you do it at Walk-Ons. That's right. There's no better place. Tons of TVs, tons of great menu items. They have a new menu too, as well as some great drink specials. If you don't believe me, I'll take it from Drew Brees.
Game day at Walk-Ons is just different. And it starts with the way our teammates prep each dish from our scratch menu. No shortcuts. We are hand cutting every single mozzarella log straight from the block. Hand peeling, stuffing, and bacon wrapping each voodoo shrimp. Hand carving ribeyes for our steaks and po' boys. And hand slicing, then tossing our boneless wings and our house-made sauces. With wall-to-wall TVs and food like this, why would you want to watch anywhere else? That's game day. The Walk-Ons way.
All right, we appreciate Drew Brees' support of Pewter Report. It's nice when a New Orleans Saints legend helps out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the team that officially ended his career. But we appreciate that. Listen, I like the Saints, so I always like to take little shots at them. And I'm not the only one, right? Okay, let's get on to the second pick. We have folks want a linebacker. We're going to give him a linebacker. And this was a linebacker. I'll tell you what, I like the player. I love the person.
Yeah.
And that's Demetrius Knight. And I'll tell you why. This guy, he started his career at Georgia Tech, played 3 years, and then graduated, got his degree in 3 years. Super smart, high IQ, not just football IQ, but like really smart player. Then he went to Charlotte and played and actually had a couple of interceptions, had a pick 6 at Charlotte. And he's married. He has 2 children. He's exceptionally mature. And he's going to be 25 in July, so he's a little bit older. He's one of the more elder prospects in this year's draft. That may be a detriment, but very, very serious guy, big-time leader, vocal leader, so much so that when he transferred from Charlotte to South Carolina, he walked in the door and they just about gave him the C on the chest. That's right. He asserted himself as a leader right away, and they voted him a team captain. Now, this is a defense that has Nick Amawari, the safety. It has T.J. Sanders, the defensive tackle, Kyle Kennard, the outside linebacker, Tonka Hemingway, the other defensive tackle, Odell Fortune. I mean, those are all NFL draft picks this year. And this guy earns the C on his chest and had a really good year at South Carolina. And he's, like I said, he's mature. He's already married. He's got kids, very well-spoken, high football IQ. And how about this, Josh? To put money on the table at Charlotte, he spent time after practice as an Uber delivery driver. And he was making Uber runs to put more money on the table while he's going to school for his master's, and while he is a father and a husband and a football player. This guy's work ethic is incredible. His story is incredible. And the Buccaneers are bringing him in for a top 30 visit. And there's an obvious interest in him. They didn't get the formal interview at the combine, but they did meet with them twice at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah. And to go back to that captain, the other thing that typically signifies, especially for somebody playing in the back seven, is a high-end communicator.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, just kind of relating this back to the Bucs, something that the Bucs struggled with on defense last year, this is Todd Bowles' words, not mine, was communication. So for him to have that it certainly lends itself towards being a high-end communicator, plus the maturity. He's somebody that you feel like, and the Bucs talk about this all the time, it's not just about the player on the field, but it's the player in the locker room, the person. And you feel like with somebody like Demetrius Knight, you're definitely getting that. Now, it's not just that he's this great person and has no on-field abilities or contributions. One of the things that's really interesting with him, and specifically in this day and age of football, the NFL over the last 2 to 3 seasons has started to pitch back to more of a run-centric league.
Yeah.
Right. So running plays are up over the last couple of years. Yards per carry is up over the last couple of years. NFL teams are moving on offense towards exploiting how defenses shifted to stop the pass with lighter linebackers. Well, Demetrius Knight is one of the bigger linebackers in this draft. 6'2". I'm just going to round off there. 235 pounds, which is, if you were to go to like something like mock draftables or something like that, it's going to say it's on the lowest percentile or lower end of the percentile, but that goes back to like 1999. You talk about linebackers these days that are regularly playing at 225 to 230. A 235 guy, he packs a little bit more pop, a little bit more wallop. So
that's right.
long arms at almost 33 inches. I liken him, and Bucs fans may not like this, but in terms of role, he's a much better version, or much more projectable version of KJ Britt, right?
Yep.
But
hold on. Before we scare the folks, this guy ran a 4.58 at the combine. Okay, 4.58. To put that in perspective,
much more athletic.
Servassier Dennis ran a 4.63. Levante David ran a 4.65. So this guy has the foot speed of a Levante David or a Servassier Dennis, not a KJ Britt, who was closer to 4.75, right? So, and I like the fact that he has 4 interceptions over the past 2 seasons, including a pick 6 at Charlotte. So it shows me that he can make plays on the ball in coverage, which is something that KJ Britt couldn't do.
Well, and the 10-yard split, right? We talked about Tyke Smith's 10-yard split, if I remember from just a few minutes ago, was 1.58. Demetrius Knight's 10-yard split is 1.58. So he's very impactful in the first 5 to 10 yards. He can speed up real quick, and he plays downhill really well with that added pop. He fits the run really well. He's a great add-on blitzer. So he can be that. He's not nearly as athletic as a Devin White, but he can certainly fill that role when you talk about like traditionally how Todd Bowles has kind of bifurcated his linebacker roles. He's that downhill. Let's mug him up into the A gaps. Let's let him use a little bit more of his size. We use him as a pressure player. He can get out to the flats. He can chase down runs, sideline to side. And they talk about that. You talk about that a lot, wanting that in your linebackers. So he's got a lot of that. And then a lot of people feel like he's the best coverage linebacker in this draft, even more so than a Jihad Campbell. I want to say Pro Football Focus just gave him that superlative when looking at the linebackers in this class. He was given their highest or best coverage backer designation. So I think I've been very clear on this. I don't think any rookie linebackers can cover. It's something that doesn't develop till 3, 4, 5 years into the league, and it's hard to project who's going to be that guy. But it's a solid skill set to start with. He can drop into hooks. He can get to the flat. He can cover backs out of the backfield as long as they're not running like a Texas route or something like that. He has a good feel for what's going on around him and route development. So there's a lot to work with there. And I think that you could easily kind of put him into that KJ Britt, Servassier Dennis kind of timeshare that the Bucs were trying to do early last year before Dennis went out for the season. I could easily see Knight getting on the field in that kind of role. And if the Bucs want to hedge Levante David snaps a little bit by rotating all three, I could see that happening as well.
And also, too, I think he's more of a Mike. I don't know that he
Yes.
is more of a weak side linebacker. So what you would do is you would draft him, and then in 2026, which would be the contract year for Servatier Dennis, move him to moneybacker spot, which is the Levante David weak side linebacker. Bucs typically have two linebackers in the field. They run nickel most of the time. And I think Dennis is probably better suited for that role, although he can play Mike and is set to play Mike this year as well. So it's a pick that will probably cause Servatier Dennis to move, but that's not the end of the world. I think these two guys would be a good 1-2 punch if they develop, if they're as good as advertised for the Buccaneers post Levante David, whenever that is. Maybe Levante comes back for another year in 2026. We'll see how he fares this year. But so we have now Malachi Starks, a Georgia player, national champion. We have a Senior Bowl player in Demetrius Knight. We know that the Buccaneers are getting on the Georgia train. They drafted Jake Camarda a couple years ago, and they said, well, let's try a defensive player rather than a special teams player. They drafted Tyke Smith. They hit a home run there. We know that they like Senior Bowl players. They've stocked up on those guys before. Well, there was another player at the Senior Bowl that just absolutely wowed Josh and I. And this is a guy that when we saw the one-on-one pass rush drills, you and I were like glued together watching those drills because we love pass rush. This guy jumped off the field to us. We're talking about UCLA, Oluwafemi Oladejo. He goes by the name of Femi Oladejo. And you talk about high motor. You talk about intensity. This guy was screaming and yelling so much on day one that when I went to interview him after that first practice, Oladejo's voice was just about shot. But you talk about high character, impressive demeanor. This screams Todd Bowles guy. And here's the crazy thing. As you mentioned before, he played outside linebacker, really defensive end at UCLA, just 10 games because he was the middle linebacker at UCLA. And the coach wanted to get the best 11 guys in the field. And Carson Schlesinger finally kind of developed enough to get on the field. So they put him at middle linebacker and they moved Femi Oladejo to defensive end. He got 4.5 sacks and is admittedly raw. He'll be the first one to tell you, like, I'm still developing my pass rush plan, still developing my pass rush moves, but 4.5 sacks, high motor guy. And they went to the Senior Bowl, impressed in the one-on-ones, got some really good quality wins. Then in the game gets 2 more sacks. The arrow's pointing up. We had this guy as the Bucs' 3rd-round draft pick. When it's all said and done, because he interviews so well, Josh, he might not be there in round 3, but we're going to put him there for this one.
Yeah, just very impressive in terms of the IQ needed to switch positions and still pop the way he has. And what really impressed me was at the Senior Bowl, and you don't see it on his tape at UCLA. He's, like he said, he's learning to kind of rush the passer. So he didn't have much in terms of a pass rush arsenal. He was just kind of winning the same way Yaya Diaby used to win, which was, I'm going to run through you, right? He's a linear athlete, and a lot of his measurables compare so much to Yaya. So it's a very similar profile. What impressed me at Senior Bowl was you saw him trying new things. And to do that in that setting, an all-star showcase, and say, you know what, rather than me just putting out my best stuff, right, and just trying to leverage that, I'm going to show NFL teams that I'm willing to try different things. So I remember trying to remember it correctly, he faked trying to win high side and then threw a spin move that I don't think I saw at all on his tape at UCLA, but just tried to throw an inside spin counter during the Senior Bowl. And I was just really impressed with somebody in that setting saying, this isn't something that I'm comfortable with, but I'm going to show that I am trying to develop. So, just he looks like he has no body fat, right? Just extreme, like muscled up, especially on the top end there. And and just to kind of give a few of his measurables,
really, in terms of his body size. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Yaya, I want to say, is like 6'4", 6'5". He's 6'3". Yaya's like I think he came in at like 267. This guy came in at 259.
Yeah.
Wingspan 82 1/8 inches. Arm length a little bit on the lower end, 33 3/8. But his vertical jump was 36.5 inches. That's the 82nd percentile. His broad jump was 120 inches. That's the 72nd percentile. And I think that goes to, when you talk about the physical traits, he is explosive. And his best way of winning right now is speed to power. He can get around the arc a little bit. I don't think he's super flexible and has a ton of bend, but I could definitely see him developing a way to create pressure very much in the way that Yaya has kind of developed in year 2. Like, I'm gonna try and win with speed to power and win with long arms, and then I'm gonna have some type of inside counter. When I open a guy up, I'm gonna try and win that inside lane. Because of his off-ball linebacker background, he's very aggressive in playing the run. He loves to set a hard edge. If you've got a guard or a tackle that you're trying to pull into him, he is not afraid to throw that shoulder and just absolutely freeze that guy in his tracks. So he's still learning how to play the run as an edge defender. So I think he can sometimes get out of his own, just kind of lanes and create some gaps and openings for running backs. But that'll come with time. And and if there's any team that I have faith in developing an outside linebacker's ability to set the run on the edge, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, especially with Larry Foote back at that outside linebacker position. He really understands it from an inside linebacker point of view. And I think that's the interesting thing here too. This guy has years worth of experience at inside linebacker. Started at Cal as an inside linebacker. They went to UCLA for the last 2 years of his college career and spent his junior season at inside linebacker. So he sees the game from a little bit of a bigger picture. It's just getting used to playing not in the middle of the field, but on the edge of the field and setting that edge. But he's a quick learner. He's a quick study, very smart, bright guy, engaging personality. I think if you were to poll all of the general managers and head coaches that interviewed him, either at the combine or have him in for official 30 visits, whether they draft him or not, and only one team's going to draft him, but if you were to ask them after the draft, give me 3 names of your favorite interviews, he probably pops up on so many of them just because of the way he carries himself. He cares. He's passionate about the game. He draws you in. He has a natural leadership ability. He's just really raw at the position. So again, a little bit of inside, scoop here on this particular mock draft. Again, it's our job at Pewter Report. The reason why we do 5 mock drafts is, first of all, we don't know who they're going to draft, right? So we're trying to find that out, and it's a process because we go to the Senior Bowl and we watch these players, we interview them. We go to the combine, we interview these players, right? And then we do our homework, we watch film, etc. But it's a process, just like it is for teams. They set their draft board and they change their draft board based upon interviews and measurables and injuries and character and those types of things, right? So it's a process. Same thing with us. But one thing we try to do, and it's our job at Pewter Report, is to educate Bucs fans about players that are on this team's radar, whether Josh and I like them or not, whether we love them or not. That's our job. And so that's kind of what we're charged with doing. And you'll see some of these names pop up in the Bucs Best Bets. You might see some of these names pop up again in our final mock draft, which comes out April 21st, which is Monday, a couple of days before the draft. But we wanted to, Josh and I, when we're doing this mock draft, we wanted to do 2 things. Put the example out there of not the edge rusher in the first round, but a defensive back, right? And Malachi Starks was a name that they had interviewed formally at the combine. We'll see if he gets an official 30 visit. But the other guy was Femi Oladejo. We're like, we have to do a mock to get him in there as well. And also, too, with Demetrius Knight, him getting a official 30 visit, plus the interest that this team's had in him, we had to kind of put him in the draft as well, just to get fans familiarized with this. Because if it happens on draft weekend, then you guys will have some familiarity with these names. And Femi Oladejo is a player, Josh, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if they go a different direction in round one, or if the edge rusher that they want is not there, and there's not that edge rusher in round two that they like, or maybe they take Oladejo in round two, right? For all we know. But this is a guy that is kind of like a backup plan at edge rusher, just in case they don't get an elite guy, and in case they feed the secondary with the more premium pick, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To the point that you were making earlier, that we definitely wanted to get him in. I was trying to shoehorn him into 3.0, and you said, and Scott was telling me, "Don't worry, Josh, we are absolutely going to have him as one of our mock drafts, but we're gonna continue to go with what kind of the path we had been down on that 3.0." But we had kind of made that decision at that point that he was definitely going to be in this one, because if you look at the things that the Bucs hold in high regard when they look at a prospect, both in terms of what they can do on field, their physical traits, and then those intangibles, those off the field things that make Mike Evans, not just what he does on the field, or makes Chris Godwin the type of guy that you're going to bet on after his second major lower body injury. And you say, you know what, we're still going to sign up for what was it, $66 million over 3 years. The Levante Davids, who, has become the silhouette of the player that they absolutely look for. Oladejo meets all of those thresholds that they would look for. And that's why he absolutely is on their radar, in our opinion, and why we want to make sure we're introducing him to the Pewter Report viewers and readers and listeners and all of that.
And if he does get drafted, then we will call him Oladejo. Right? Just like we do
absolutely
Diaby. All right. So let's keep this train going here. Let's go to the fourth round, which is it's time for another defensive back. Because this is a draft where we said that they're going to really attack the secondary, and we mean it. So we've got three defensive players drafted now: Malachi Starks, Demetrius Knight, and Wafemi Oladejo. And let's just do more defense, Josh. How about that? Let's do it.
Well, I know you're all about it.
I'm all about it. Yeah. Fourth round pick, Kansas cornerback Kobe Bryant. Now, it's funny because you and I are kind of cooling a little bit on Malachi Starks, and I'm cooling on Kobe Bryant, not because he went to Kansas. I've already stated that. I like Kansas players that can play NFL football. I prefer them in the NFL rather than wearing those awful Toucan Sam looking uniforms. It's a fictional bird, Josh. I mean, there's no such thing as a Jayhawk. Okay, it's a fictional bird. It's the bastard son of Toucan Sam. So, and some really hideous uniforms too, I might add. Right? I mean, that's garish right there. Sorry, it just is.
It certainly stands out in a crowd.
In the wrong way, yes. But at the same time, I love me some Kobe Bryant on the field. He is tough as nails. Todd Bowles said he wants a ball hawk. Boy, howdy, this guy is a ball hawk, right? Let's rattle through some of these numbers here. In 2021, the Alabama native went to KU and had 2 interceptions as a freshman, starter as a freshman. Then as a sophomore, 3 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Then next year, 2023, 1 sack, 4 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. And then last year, as a senior, 1/2 sack, 4 more interceptions, 7 pass breakups, and a pick 6. So he is a player that really has a lot of ball skills, and he's a good tackler. He's up to 180 pounds. He's 6 foot tall, barely soaking wet. He's 180 pounds. Okay, very thin frame, but he plays like he's 6'2", 205. Yeah. He is a hard hitter, fearless when it comes to run support. Matter of fact, he was my favorite interview at the Combine outside of Donovan Ezeraku and Wafemi Oladejo. He was up there because this guy is 1,000% dog. He is, he's got some great instincts, nose for the ball, good hands, can come up with those interceptions, right? Where some guys drop picks, he will catch them. But then he said, really what he wants to do in the NFL is tackle Saquon Barkley. He's like, I want to tackle big backs. That's what he wants to do. And that's great for a guy that's
Those
known
big
as
backs
a
will
ball
certainly
hawk.
oblige him.
Yeah. So I love this kid's tape. What I don't love are the measurables and the fact that he's 6 foot. He's not a prototypical outside cornerback like 6'1", 6'2" with long arms like Todd Bowles likes. And he runs a 4.53 rather than a 4.35. If he could just somehow take the 3 and the 5 and switch him around. I don't think they'll let him do that though. But I don't know if he has enough speed to play on the outside. But
I think
he's a fun watch. He really is.
Yeah,
I think fit in with the Bucs culture.
Yeah, I think that he's got to be in the right system. And I honestly think that the way the Bucs play defense, they are the zone heaviest team in the NFL. I think he can play their base cover 3 quarters type defense. I don't see an issue with his long speed for that system. It's the weight, right? Like his height, 6 foot, that's the 49th percentile, basically right in the middle. If you had to guess what percentile his weight, that 180 pounds is, out of all cornerbacks who have been measured since 1999, what percentile do you think he's in?
10%.
Fifth.
Oh.
Fifth percentile, right? And there's that specifically, just that reminds me of, and I want to say it was a Mississippi State corner from a couple years ago. If I remember correctly, the Commanders drafted him.
Yeah.
And he first rounder, what was his name? Was it Martin Emerson?
No, it was the other guy. It was Emmanuel
Forbes.
Emmanuel Forbes, yep, exactly.
Emmanuel Forbes, that's it.
Yep.
Ball skills and everything, but he just was too small to play at the NFL level, specifically in terms of his weight. That's the one thing that worries me about Kobe Bryant, because you and I, and you said you were cooling on him. You and I both love the tape. We're just not sure whether the Bucs would see him as an outside corner or if he would have to move into the slot. And if he moves into the slot, okay, he's got the mentality to play the slot, but you're also going to go up against power slots, guys like Drake London, who is not going to be afraid to throw him 10 yards at, at the stem, right? So can he hold up against that? But the things that you really like about Kobe Bryant and that you're betting on him being able to translate into the NFL beyond the ball skills is just how competitive he is at the catch point. And specifically, if you put him into a zone system where he can keep his eyes in the backfield and then break down onto routes, it gives him his best opportunity to win at the NFL level. So there's a lot to like with him. It just comes down to, in my opinion, is he going to be able to play at that weight? And each team's going to have to make that decision for themselves. In a Todd Bowles, I don't think the Bucs would see him as an outside corner unless it's put, like last year, we need a body there because we've run out of the guys that we were counting on. Because while he's 6 foot, and I think that's a threshold for them, the arm length is not as long as they would probably like. And I think that that's more of a disqualifying factor than even just the 40 speed.
Yeah. I think for this pick, and we have him in the 4th round, and it's kind of interesting because who was their 4th round pick last year? Bucky Irving, right? Bucky Irving was not a fast running back, right? Just was he a 4.55, 4.58, kind of running back, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was in that range. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here. But the thing is not the biggest guy, not the fastest running back, right? There was a lot not to like about Bucky Irving, which is why he was a
4.55. Yeah,
4.55. Right. Okay. Yeah. So. And the athleticism, a 29.5 inch vertical, right? A 9.7 broad jump. Those are not great numbers. But you looked at the tape and you just said football player, right? Like, look at him, make you miss. He can do those things that kind of erases some of the athleticism. And there's enough things on tape with Kobe Bryant, the sure tackling. He's got a tremendous run defense grade, plus the amount of passes he breaks up and the ones he intercepts. He's got a nose for the ball. And the other thing too, and this is what I love about the combine when we go there, is we get to interview these guys and you get a feel for their personality, right? Why does that matter? Because there's so much mentalness to football. You're playing on the world's biggest stage, under the lights, TV cameras, crowded stadiums, lots of pressure. You're paid millions to play this game, and you need to be an alpha. And we had Mello Dotson in our first mock draft, the other Kansas cornerback, right?
Yep.
And when I went to the combine and I interviewed both of these players, boy, this was like night and day. This was like alpha and beta. And guess what? Kobe Bryant was the alpha. You can tell he ran that room. He had that kind of dominant personality. And I talked to the other Kansas players at the combine, Devin Neal and a couple of others, about both of these guys. And they both said, oh yeah, Kobe Bryant was the leader. He was the alpha. He was that guy on our defense. And even talking to Mello Dotson, he just was a little bit more of a shy, reserved, kind of like more like lieutenant rather than field general, right? And so that personality, that confidence that Kobe Bryant has, it reminds me of Bucky Irving a little bit, right? Because Bucky is one of those guys. He knows he's small. He doesn't care. He plays like he's 6'2", 240 pounds. He plays like Derrick Henry, And so if they draft Kobe Bryant, and they did have a formal meeting with him at the combine, and we'll see if they bring him in for an official 30 visit. But if they pick him, it will be like that process that they went through with Bucky Irving and just say, screw it. We're going with the tape, and we believe in this guy, in his football character, and we believe in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's just got that dog mentality, and those are the guys kind of harken back to like a Steve Smith. They're just going to find a way to be successful despite the physical measurements that might say otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when it comes to the college basketball season, it's winding down. But the good news is there are plenty of other sports in full swing, including baseball, a sport that I don't really care for, but I do like hockey. And we're getting ready for hockey playoffs. So whether it is baseball for you pastime aficionados, whether it's UFC fights, whether it is the NFL draft that's coming up, whether it's Slam Madness, or whether it's NBA basketball, there are plenty of sports to watch. And the best place to watch those sports is at the place that is sponsoring the show, Walk On Sports Bistro, Wesley Chapel, Midtown Tampa, and Lakeland. And here's the cool thing. Make sure that you go to Walk-Ons and get their Walk-Ons Rewards app. Download the app. It's free. You're going to get free mozzarella logs when you do that. They're not mozzarella sticks, folks. These are logs. You can make a whole meal out of them. They're that good, and they're that big. You're going to get free mozzarella logs when you download the Walk-Ons app. And then every time you go in there and you scan or you check in, when you get your drinks and get your food, you're going to earn reward points that will be manifested in free appetizers the next time that you go. So it's a great way to get rewarded at Walk-Ons. And they've got TVs galore, plenty of sports on, even in the spring and the summer. And make sure that you check out the 3 locations in the Tampa Bay area: Wesley Chapel, my neck of the woods, Midtown Tampa, down there by the stadium, and Lakeland. Josh, we're going to continue on day 3 with our selections here. And we've gotten 2 defensive backs, and we've gotten 4 defensive players so far. So Todd Bowles is a very happy camper. However, Josh Grizzard is not. That's right. Josh Grizzard is like, hey, wait a minute. Hold on here. I'm the new OC. Can I get a player? And Josh and I say, sure, you can. Let's give the Buccaneers a wide receiver and a punt return and kick return guy in Jalen Lane, a player that they had a formal interview with at the NFL Combine. and a player that was one of the more fast players there, running a sub 4.4 time in the 40-yard dash. Jalen Lane, what do you like about him, Josh?
Well, I think it's, obviously the height isn't there. He's 5'10" if we're rounding. But I do like his weight at that height. So 191 pounds. So he's a little bit more sturdy than his height would typically say. And then he's got actually solid arm length, right? So 31 3/4 inches. That's the 45th percentile for all wide receivers. But that's against a 26th percentile weight and a 9th percentile height. So the arms are long for his frame. And then when you get to the things that are a little bit more controllable, I don't know of anybody who can really improve their height in a realistic way. But Jalen Lane checks a lot of the boxes when you talk about the physical traits. So that 4.34 40 you talked about, 94th percentile, a 1.50 10-yard split, 94th percentile, 132-inch broad jump. That's 11 feet, folks. 94th percentile. He ran his 3-cone in 6.75 seconds. That's 83rd percentile. And then his short shuttle was 4.12, which is 75th percentile. So that spider chart that you may see when they look at guys, like all of the stuff that's controllable is fully filled out. And then he's just, he's short and a little bit. He's actually, I think he weighs more than Jalen McMillan at, 2 inches shorter, 2.25 inches shorter. So, but how does that look on the field? Well, he's the type of player that you would want to manufacture touches for, right? So kind of what the Bucs were hoping for in Cameron Johnson. He just couldn't stay on the field last year. But he's a guy that you want to get, on a perimeter screen, give him a couple of blocks and then just watch him shoot down the field. And he's got the short area explosive quickness and then the long speed on top of that. He's the guy that, the Bucs were so creative with end arounds and jet sweeps and things like that. He's a player you want to put on the field for those types of plays. And I could even see the Bucs trying to sub him in to those 21 personnel. It wouldn't actually be 21, but some of those really creative plays that they did last year out of 21. Yeah. This is a guy you would want on the field as a part of that. And that's really what makes him great. And he uses his, long for his frame arms to catch the ball off his frame, which I think is really important for receivers at the NFL level. And then you mentioned the special team stuff. So the Bucs last year started their season with Bucky Irving as their kick returner, right? I think it was like week 5 in Atlanta when, he missed some of that game because he got hurt and he got a hip injury on a kickoff return, if I remember all of that correctly.
Right before the end of
that was right. It was in Carolina. Yep. So the Bucs still don't have like a really good kick return. I think they were using Rashad White. They were trying to use Trey Palmer. So Lane is somebody you could pick up on day 3. He could be an immediate contributor as a returner, and then a guy you put on the field for 5 to 10 snaps where you're trying to manufacture some touches and getting some home runs. And he certainly fits that bill. I think he's excellent. I think he's better than a lot of the other receivers in this draft who are getting a lot more pub. And I think that he could be a very creative home run hitter.
I do too. And I like the fact that he's a punt returner. He's got 2 punt return touchdowns in college. And I like Sean Tucker as the kick return guy, but have him be the other guy. I'm fine with that. I think that this would be a solid pick. And again, too, it's, this team has high hopes for Cam Johnson, couldn't stay on the field. And so this team is ready to move on, right? If you're Cam Johnson, you better be healthy in training camp if you want to have a chance, because if they draft this guy, they're going to have one of these guys, probably a battle royale between Trey Palmer, Jalen Lane, and Cam Johnson for a roster spot. So that's kind of how that works out. And that's building the roster from the bottom up. That's getting more talent to have better reserves, right? So when you need those guys, you're not having to pull a Ryan Miller from the practice squad or rely on a Raheem Jarrett, who just hasn't really come around and developed yet, et cetera. So I like the pick, and I understand that the desire to upgrade special teams, because there's been nothing special about Tampa Bay special teams in quite some time.
Yeah, and the thing with Lane is, if you look at and I think you did a really great job of kind of describing some of the guys he'd be competing for a roster spot, But if you look at each one of their best traits, right? So like Cameron Johnson, it's the created manufactured touch, the short area quickness at or behind the line of scrimmage. Trey Palmer, it's the long speed, right? And he can stretch defense. And then for Rakim Jarrett, I think his best, what he can do is those intermediate routes where he can create after the catch.
Yeah.
Jalen Lane has all three of those skill sets.
That's true.
And I think the yards after the catch is a huge thing because at the top of the Bucs roster, like Mike Evans is not a natural yak guy.
Right.
Chris Godwin was earlier in his career, but I think the injuries have kind of taken that away from him in terms of just being able to create after the catch and make guys miss. He uses his frame to kind of run through guys. So does Mike, but it's not that Deebo Samuel-esque type of way to just create all this extra yardage after you get the ball. Trey Palmer, certainly not that. I still don't think Jalen McMillan, because he's a bit more of a slight frame. I think Jalen Lane possesses that skill set, which would make him a little bit more unique, and I think he has it better than Rakim Jarrett. But you take those three receivers at the bottom of the roster, and I would say Jalen Lane has each of their, and Scott, you use this word a lot, their superpowers. I think he possesses it. So you could almost consolidate three players into one. So if he were to be selected, if I were writing out the depth chart, I'd probably put him ahead of those three guys as kind of wide receiver 4 right off the bat and see if anybody takes it away from him.
Yeah, I like that premise for sure. Just like I like going to walk-ons for happy hour, which is from 3 to close on Mondays, all day on Tuesdays, plus $5 Tito's. That's hard to beat. Then you have 2 sets of happy hour from 3 to 6 and from 9 to close on Wednesday and Thursday. And then on Fridays from 3 to 6 as well. And happy hour at walk-ons is just one of the reasons to go to walk-ons.
Yeah, so what happened out there tonight?
We struck out at home with leftovers, then we remembered walk-ons.
What effect did the situation have?
Spirit soared. Nick took on a burger. Jen obliterated her ribeye po' boy. And speaking of spirits, Laura even scored a real tasty cocktail. She needed that.
Any lessons learned today?
Yeah. Head straight to walk-ons.
Scratch-made dishes, wall-to-wall TVs, craft beers, and cocktails. Walk-ons for the win.
Well, we had Yaya Diaby on earlier today at 4 o'clock, so make sure you check out that podcast if you hadn't already, because it's a fantastic interview with the Bucs outside linebacker heading into year 3. Lots of news was made on that podcast as well, so make sure you check that out either Friday or this weekend. And then we're going to have another Buccaneer player on next Wednesday, Michael Pratt, who we were big fans of last year. He was a Bucs best bet when it came to the quarterback position at a Tulane. Bucs almost drafted him in the 7th round, but didn't. But we're going to be talking to him, and he's going to be battling Kyle Trask for the backup quarterback job, and maybe that right to be the quarterback of the future. Although I think Baker Mayfield's got a lot of game left in his future, and so we will have. Another slate of Monday through Thursday podcasts next week. And then we will have our final mock draft on April 21st. And if you're wondering when those Bucs best bets will be coming out, well, we're starting those on April 12th. We have the quarterbacks preview. We'll go quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, tackles, guards and centers, defensive tackles, outside linebackers, inside linebackers, nickelback, cornerback, and safety previews. And those Bucs best bets will all be embedded within those. So you're going to have about 12 straight days from April 12th, what am I saying? April 12th through April 23rd for those previews. And so they're coming up right now. So we're going to have a lot more draft coverage as we get closer to the draft. And yes, we are doing a 3-day live draft show at the team headquarters again. You coming down for that this year, Josh?
To be determined.
Okay. We'd love to have you. The invite's there. And if you're not coming down, we're just going to Zoom you in. How about that?
Love that.
All right.
I will be there in one way or another, maybe physically, but certainly virtually, if not.
Outstanding. We love your draft coverage as well. And let's finish out the draft with a player that is the 7th round pick for the Buccaneers, but you like this guy. He's not the 7th round pick for you in your heart. You have him a little bit higher than that, and that is Nico Reed. And he made an impact play right there. That was the game-winning interception against Penn State. Doesn't get more clutch than that. He's an outside cornerback. We talked about Jacob Parrish a little bit, my Kansas State guy who played outside corner, but will project inside because he's 5'10". Nico Reed showed a lot of toughness, a lot of ability to play outside, plays bigger than his size. But boy, this would be a nice nickel for Tampa Bay, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, just very competitive, despite the smaller size. And he stays in phase so well. And especially like, I think a route that's a little bit more popular in today's NFL is the slot fade. And we talk, based on his size, he'd probably be a nickel with the Bucs, but he defends fade routes so well, staying in phase, making sure that he keeps up with the receiver, but keeps his body in between the receiver and the ball. And so he's constantly making plays on those balls and pushing guys to the sideline and giving receivers almost no room to work with. And I want to say that Penn State interception was on a slot or on a fade route, just like that. So, and like what he was doing against Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State and Amika, like he was just super competitive with all of them. And these are some of the biggest games. Like he showed up in prime time against some of the best competition. And I love that from a seventh. Again, we go back to what Trevor Sikkema said, the give a shit meter. It's super high with him. Now, he's going to have to overcome a lot because like the athletic testing was not great for this guy. Like he was already really, really small, right? 5'9". He actually weighs more than Kobe Bryant at 183 pounds. He's got Bryant by a few cheeseburgers. But the vert was only 32 inches. The broad jump was 908. So what's that? Like 100 inches exactly, I think, or 98 inches, something like that. But the agility scores were a little bit better. The 3-cone specifically, which he was able to do in under 7 seconds. And then the 40-yard dash came in under 4.5. So he was at 4.48 there with a 10-yard split, very similar to Tyke Smith, 1.58. So, but all of that, for those of you who follow the relative athletic score system by Kentley Platt, which is an amazing system, his overall relative athletic score was a 3.32. So that's a lot to overcome. But with seventh rounders, you're just looking for, is there something about this player that's super interesting that might be able to translate? And when that is, the tape looks really, really good. Yeah. That's one of my favorite things to throw on day 3, because his tape is just fantastic. But smooth hips, super competitive. He's got some ball skills, and he plays his best ball against the best competition. That's worth a 7th rounder for me.
Yeah. And he's a guy that gives you that depth at nickel corner, right? Because we've seen Tyke Smith miss some games last year too, right? And if you're going to draft Malachi Starks and have him as your nickel, and you move Tyke Smith there, this would allow you to keep Smith at strong safety. If an injury happens to Malachi Starks, you pop in Nico Reed. Again, it's all about building depth too. You have to have quality depth. The Bucs didn't have it last year. That's why they had to snatch guys like Mike Edwards off the street and Troy Hill, the corner off the street, and and unfortunately play guys like Tyreek Funderburk and Josh Hayes that ended up costing them games because they just weren't good enough to play on defense. Special teams, sure, but not make plays on defense and get you out of games. And so it was unfortunate. I think they've gotten better in terms of depth. They've added some veterans. So they brought Bryce Hall back. And also signed Kendall Vildor, easy for me to say.
Vildor,
to help with some veteran depth, but it's about experience, but it's also about talent, right? And so you need to have, hopefully those two converge and you have a really good player. And maybe that's what Jamel Dean ends up being if he gets beaten out by a starting caliber corner. And we'll see what the Buccaneers draft, and we'll see what we end up with our final mock draft, which again will come out in just a couple of weeks, April 21st. Will it be Savon Ravel in round 1? What are your thoughts on Ravel possibly going late first? This is not a deep cornerback draft in terms of really quality players, starting caliber guys. And certainly there's only a handful of guys that are, day one or day two guys that have the requisite height that Todd Bowles likes, those long outside corners with speed.
Yeah, I think Revel going first round is almost a foregone conclusion at this point when you look at the upside and the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was an ACL injury, an ACL tear. And you see so many players who come back from that these days and, are fine. And Revel's ACL injury happened so early in the season that he's going to be past the 9-month mark to where he's starting to not just, okay, I'm cleared, but he's building, the strength in the knee and getting it back to almost 100%. So I think at this point, him going first round is a foregone conclusion. Like I would say I think there is a good chance he is the third corner off the board. I would assume Travis Hunter being one,
right? Jedi Barron or Will Johnson.
So so maybe fourth. But I could actually see him going ahead of Barron because I think that depending on the team, Barron will be higher on some boards, and then Revel will be higher on a lot because Barron is a little bit smaller. He's got shorter arms, so I think he may be off of some teams' boards. Like the Bucs, unless they see him as more of a slot or a safety. And he's kind of done it all, which is really cool. Right. But I would not be surprised if Revel is the third corner off the board.
Yep. So. We have a $9.99 super chat here from Edwin Mill 83. Where are the defensive tackles? The depth the team currently has no juice. Cansey and Vea come off the field, and it's just a bunch of Jags, just a guys, right? We need a relentless pass rush. Yeah, we didn't have a defensive tackle in this draft. It's just kind of the way it fell. We wanted to hit some other needs and really address the secondary. Here's the thing, too, about the defensive tackle draft, Josh, and this is a defensive tackle laden draft class.
It's like 43 of them.
Yeah, and you can look at this in multiple ways, right? If you get a defensive tackle, like let's say the third round, that player very well might have a second round draft grade because there's going to be so many drafted in the first 2 rounds. Teams only have so many needs, right? Only so many teams have so many needs for a defensive tackle. There's a glut of them. There's the demand will certainly be met. The supply is going to outweigh the demand in this. And it could be a situation where you get an undrafted free agent defensive tackle that you might have had a 4th or 5th round grade on just because there's so many of them. The teams only need so many defensive tackles, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I liken it to 2023 where the Bucs had, what was it? Rakim Jarrett and Chris Izzian. I want to say there was at least one other. Was it Kayvon Merriweather who all made the team out of camp as undrafted free agents because the Bucs there was a really nice lineup for them in terms of talented players who probably should have been drafted who were undrafted free agents. So what I would say to Edwin Mill 83 is the likelihood that there are draftable defensive tackles available as undrafted free agents is going to be very high. Yeah. And I think the Bucs do a very good job of recruiting those guys and getting them to sign with Tampa Bay because Todd Bowles is one of the most, and this is something I will give him credit for. He doesn't get enough credit from fans. Yeah. He is willing to let young guys play. Yeah, and if you are an undrafted free agent who's looking to make a roster and to find your way onto the field, the Bucs are one of the best teams to hook up with to do that. So we didn't have a defensive tackle in this draft because it is deep enough that we think that they could potentially get a guy on as an undrafted free agent. But I feel like there will probably be one in our final mock. And somebody maybe day 3 that could even have a day 2 grade for a lot of teams because it is so deep.
Yep. We gave the Bucs a wide receiver, but on day 3. But what if Tedero McMillan falls? The Arizona wide receiver. I've seen him as late as 17 in some mocks. Heard a few negative things, but I mean, he's a big dude, a very productive receiver. Kind of a Mike Evans type in terms of the size and the length, right? I mean, he's one of the bigger receivers in this draft class. Might he be too tempting to pass up if he happens to fall to 19, Josh?
If it's me, I would let him go. Like, I'm not super high on Tet McMillan myself. I think that there are some issues in his game that don't make him this slam dunk first rounder. And I'm pretty low on him compared to a lot of people. But he is one of the few traditional X's in this draft. Yeah. And there is a lot to like with his game. If the Bucs, I will say this, I don't think that wide receiver would be a position that the Bucs would just say, oh, there's a really great wide receiver, but we don't need wide receiver, so let's move on from it. So if they have a high draft grade on McMillan and he falls, it would not shock me that they take him. Yeah. He's just not high on my board. And I've heard a lot of people, they're like, that would be such a dumb pick because why are you using first rounder on wide receiver 4? Well, first of all, if you're taking a first round wide receiver, that's your wide receiver 3. Okay. Right. I know people are very high on Jalen McMillan, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Jalen, but this guy most likely is going to move into and get those snaps that Jalen would get. How they work it out in terms of like the roles may be a little bit different, but he'll certainly see the field. And it's not, that would be a pick where you can say, we can find ways to get him on the field this year, but really we're thinking about 2026. Yep. Mike Evans is in the last year of his deal. He may not want to play after 2025. Well, now you've got your successor to Mike Evans, and you don't have to force a wide receiver in round 1. Right.
And he already knows the scheme. He's developed. Yep. He's got 1 year.
He's learned from Mike Evans, right?
He's learned from Mike Evans. He's got a rapport with Baker Mayfield. And let's not forget, in a game that was there for the taking, a very winnable game in Kansas City, my old stomping grounds, in the rain at Monday Night Football at Arrowhead Stadium, this team was toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Went to overtime without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin, without Jalen McMillan. If they would have had a Tetero McMillan type player on the field rather than Ryan Miller or Raheem Jarrett or Trey Palmer or Sterling Shepard, who knows? Maybe they win that game. So,
the Sterling Shepard hate. I don't like it. But yeah, I'm
just saying it. Like it makes some sense. And listen, Todd Bowles was in full throat support of drafting another wide receiver this year because he said, "Hey, I can figure out defense, right? I can figure that out. But when you lose that many wide receivers, there's not a lot I can figure out, right? You just need really good players." And, Chris Godwin's still coming off that injury, right? Remember what happened last time? Chris Godwin was back for week 1 after his ACL injury, and he played in Dallas, right? He had the first catch of the season was thrown to him, and he had a good game. But he pulled a hamstring in that game and then missed week 2 at New Orleans, right? So even though Chris came back and able to cobble together a 1,000-yard season that year, he still wasn't all the way back as Chris Godwin would be. And so if you lose a Mike Evans for a couple of weeks with the hamstring injury or Chris Godwin for a couple of weeks, all of a sudden, one of those guys is your starter. The other is Jalen McMillan. Who's your number 3, right? Yep. If it's a guy like McMillan or maybe Matthew Golden from Texas, right? Or pick Luther Burden, whoever you want in there as a more of a premier wide receiver, that offense keeps clicking and still has 30 points per game potential rather than dipping down to 20 as we saw against Kansas City, against the San Francisco 49ers, et cetera.
Yeah. Just in general, from a roster management.
Thank you, Meets McGee, for the super chat. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Meets. Just in general, from a roster management or a roster building standpoint, and you see this, and I come, this space from a financial standpoint in terms of like the salary cap, but you see this in how guys get paid. There are 3 groups of players on your team that you should never be afraid to continue to invest resources in. Yep. Number 1, offensive line.
Yep.
Number 2, pass rusher. And number 3, pass catcher.
That's right.
Continue to invest those resources because you can never have enough of those 3. And you've seen it with recent Super Bowl winning teams, right?
That's right.
And the teams that end up there, right? So the Bucs in 2020, they had a really good offensive line, they had a really good pass rush, and they had Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, and Rob Gronkowski, right?
Yep.
Like the Kansas City, their pass rush has been great. When they were really hitting on all cylinders, they had Kelsey and they had Tyreek, and then they had some other guys behind them. And then it got a lot harder when they stopped investing in that. Got a lot harder when they figured out their tackle situation, right? And then obviously the Eagles most recently. So I don't have a problem with continuing to invest in those things, because if you hit with those premium draft picks, it means you don't have to pay as much. And those are the positions that cost the most money in free agents. So continue to invest resources in those 3 areas.
Yep. Our final super chat of the evening is from Tyler Lavelle. Thank you very much. $5 super chat. And we appreciate you being a Pewter Report TV channel member also very much. And he says, who's y'all's pick realistically? Well, we're going to have to make you wait until April 21st. Will it be Donovan Ezeraku? Will it be Savon Ravel Jr.? Will it be Jihad Campbell? You'll have to wait.
Jalen
Walker. Keep you in suspense. Jalen Walker. That's an interesting name too.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you're going to have to check us out on pewterreport.com, where we're going to have the latest official 30 visitors to the team facility. As we know those, we'll update the tracker and do stories on those. We'll have our draft preview starting on April 12th, which is a Saturday, with quarterbacks. Probably not going to draft a quarterback, but we will speak to a quarterback that is a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Michael Pratt will be joining us next Wednesday, and we'll talk a little bit about Savon Ravel, too, who we actually played against when East Carolina took on Tulane a couple times. So we'll get some draft intel from Michael Pratt, because he is just 1 year removed from the college game himself. That is next Wednesday at 4 p.m. on the Pewter Report podcast. And again, remember to check out our Yaya Diaby podcast from earlier today. And we'll have our final mock draft coming out April 21st, which is a Monday. And speaking of Monday, that is the day to go to walk-ons for trivia. Trivia nights are Mondays at 7 p.m. You have a chance to watch some cool sports on all the TVs, eat some fantastic food, get some awesome, amazing drinks, and the top winning teams receive exciting prizes. And remember, Monday, it's a great happy hour from 3 p.m. to close. So that encompasses the trivia nights, live trivia, Mondays at 7 p.m. at Walk-Ons. And just a reminder, 3 locations here in the Tampa Bay area: Wesley Chapel, Midtown Tampa, and Lakeland. We appreciate Walk-Ons being the exclusive sponsor of our Pewter Report mock drafts and our Pewter Report mock draft shows. So, Josh, any final thoughts on our mock draft? We appreciate everybody tuning in for the show, and you'll have another live mock draft show, not this Sunday, but the next Sunday. Is that correct?
That is correct. Guests to be determined. So still working on finding the right person. I think I threw out an idea in our group chat that I'm going to pursue that I think could be really, really fun and something a little bit different than what we've done before. So as far as final thoughts,
you mean having Jason Light on the show to to make those draft picks. Jason Light, no, we're not going to have Jason Light on the show. Jason Light will not be.
That would be so cool, though. Get Jason Light to do an actual live mock draft. Oh my gosh, the numbers we would do.
We could not pay him enough money to do that. There's no way in hell he would come on that close to the draft and do anything draft related. We're actually going to have Jason speaking on April 10th, which is a week from today at noon at One Buccaneer Place, where he will say nothing about the draft. It is his pre-draft nothing speech.
You say he would never do it. Here's my response to that. Jason Light does a lot of things that other general managers don't do, like announce signings per sources from a boat in Tampa Bay, right?
Yeah.
And 2, nobody's ever asked him.
Oh, I've asked him. I've asked him for different things around the draft, and
I know people have asked him to see his draft board before, but I don't know if anybody's ever said
his response is, "We'll talk after the draft."
Okay. I just didn't know if you were that specific. Would you like to go on a live podcast about 2 weeks out from the draft and do a hypothetical mock draft. Maybe we just have to throw it at them a different way. You get to be the Rams, right?
Right.
So the other thing, just to kind of, you asked me about a closing thought. You and I led this show by saying it was not our favorite mock draft, but I think one of the things that I really enjoy with this one as compared to some of the others is we tested ourselves and said, well, what if it doesn't quite fall the way, in a hypothetical world, you can say, well, all these guys are the first rounders. So which first rounder do you like the most for them? And kind of plug it in. We tested ourselves and said, well, what if some of these other guys that we think might be higher on the board are not there? Who do we think that could be? Right. Similar to when the Bucs traded back in 2022, right? When they had 5 guys that they really liked and then traded back. And I think 4 out of the 5 were gone. And then
we're gone. That's right. Yeah.
So it was Logan Hall. Right. So putting ourselves in that position where it's like all the theoretical favorites or the ones that we've talked ad nauseum about aren't there. Who are some of these other guys that they might be in on? So while we didn't love it, I enjoyed that process.
Yeah, exactly. Because it doesn't always work out the way teams want it.
Right.
They can be happy with their draft class once they get it, but there's still a guy or two that they missed out on, even if they feel like they hit on a lot of drafts. And listen, you look at last year's draft, Graham Barton, I think a big time hit for the Buccaneers. Tyke Smith, Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round, big time hits. Bucky Irving, probably the biggest hit far out of those. He was the 4th round pick. Chris Braswell, arrow pointing up, right? I mean, we saw Devin Culp be a big time contributor as well. Elijah Klein's in the lab. He's getting bigger and stronger. He might eventually be the Ben Bredesen replacement at left guard. So that's that's a big time draft for the Buccaneers. I think if they could hit on a similar type of draft and have that much impact, that would really be saying something. But there's just not many holes in this team, Josh. It's really gearing towards getting more depth and upgrading the talent at certain positions and having more competitiveness, right?
Yeah, it sounds to me like Jason's learned a little bit from that 2021 draft where there weren't a lot of holes on the roster, so they drafted to specifically those holes. This year, it looks like the way they've set up the roster is we feel good if we miss on guys for this position group that we'll be okay, but we're looking to upgrade every one of those position groups. So, linebacker 2 is upgradable or linebacker 3, whatever it may be. We're not looking
Cornerback
for
2.
linebacker 4, right? So at every one of these groups, we feel comfortable moving into the season with the guys we've got, but we also have allowed ourselves to be super flexible in that we can easily upgrade halfway up the depth chart. Or even at the top of the depth chart and just feel better about the room rather than saying, well, we have a specific spot for edge 3. Let's find an edge 3. We have a specific spot for QB 3. Let's find QB 3. Those were the Bucs' first 2 picks in 2021, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah, we are 8 subscribers away from 18,000. If you have yet to do so, please hit the subscribe button on our Pewter Report TV YouTube channel. And help us get
go
to
find
18,
your
000.
significant other and make them subscribe. Help us get there tonight.
That's right. Let's do that tonight. And so next Monday when we have roll call on Pewter Report's podcast at 4 p.m., we can also celebrate the fact we're at 18,000 subscribers. So appreciate all of you Pewter people for joining us. This has been a fun exercise. We get to do it one more time before the draft, and we will have that special draft show. Live 3-day coverage from the team facility here on Pewter Report TV, wall-to-wall coverage every minute from the time the draft starts on round 1 to the time it ends on day 3 and round 7. And nobody covers the draft like Pewter Report. Thank you all so much for joining us. For Josh Capo, I'm Scott Reynolds, and we'll be back on Monday, April 21st at 8:30 for our final Bucs mock draft show presented exclusively by Walk-Ons. Appreciate your time.